I'd just like to introduce the presenter, Matt Smith. Matt Smith has a wealth of experience in Microsoft and systems engineering. He joined Softwerx in 2010 with a proven track record in design, implementation, as well as support of Microsoft enterprise applications and operating systems. Matt oversees the roadmap and also feature definition of our services here at Softwerx, and he employs a wealth of product knowledge from over 20 years in the industry. Over the years, Matt has successfully supported our managed services as well as implementation and also the sales teams. And this places him in a unique position to understand customer requirements and match these to product capabilities. He's also got a special gift for communication and an ability to translate technical requirements into easily understandable language. So on that note, I'm going to hand over to you, Matt. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Patrick. So no pressure. Let's see if I can take you through this with some kind of easy to understand approach to the Cloud App Security Service. So today we're going to look at some common uses for Cloud App Security and why it's so much more than just a monitoring or alerting system, as quite a few people seem to view it as. We'll look at how Cloud App Security ties into your wider security strategy with its integration into the rest of the Microsoft 365 suite. And as Patrick said, we'll have a chance for some Q&A towards the end, but please put your questions in as we go along, and I'll get to read those. So some of you may have seen this slide before on a previous Tech Talk. I really just want to use it to emphasize that we live in a world where the services that our users connect to are outside the company network and typically outside of our control. So today we're going to focus on how we address this. If you want to know a bit more about device and user control outside the company network, you can access previous Tech Talks on that subject from the Softwerx website. So what does a Cloud App Security broker do for us in this scenario? Well, the three top use cases for a CASB like Microsoft Cloud App Security are to discover which apps and services our users are connecting to. After all, if we don't even know what they're using, how do we begin to manage what they do with them? It's also to assess if the service is suitable for business use. So there are obviously things that are sanctioned by the business for the end users to access, and that naturally means there'll be unsanctioned services that they shouldn't be using from their corporate machines. But also, do those services present a security threat to us? And these assessments shouldn't just be the obvious things like, does the business authorize the use of the service, but also, does the provider have the necessary standards like ISO 27001, for example? And finally, the third piece is we need to control access to these applications, primarily so we can ensure that they're being used appropriately by our users. We don't want the wrong data in the wrong systems. That's how we typically end up with data breaches. Now, we need to do all this across managed and unmanaged devices, our own employees and external users, and also over any network. Now, before I dive into the management portal and show you how we do some of this, I've included another favorite slide to highlight where this fits in our zero trust model. The Cloud App Security Service actually spans a number of these areas, and that's because while it primarily sits in the security policy enforcement process, it also provides us signals through app discovery and collection of logs, as well as APIs to other security systems. Again, if you want a bit more background on Zero Trust, the other sessions in this series are well worth a watch. Now, bear with me a moment while I switch screens, and we'll try and step through some live examples. There we go. So I'm going to start by landing in the Defender Security Center. Now, this is part of the Defender for Endpoint service. And as we want to get as much information from all of our endpoints as possible into Cloud App, that's the natural place to start in order to onboard or to gather information from all of those endpoint devices. Now, I'm not going to try and go through the whole configuration of this entire Defender for Endpoint service. There's a lot to that, and I think we'll probably do a session specifically on this service in the near future. What I just want to highlight before I show you how you connect it is that Defender for Endpoint isn't just for Windows client devices. There is an agent that will go on to Mac OS, and we also now have an iOS and an Android app, so you can get visibility into the sort of vulnerabilities and the access and the usage that your users are doing with those particular operating system types. So we'll take it at this stage as given that we've rolled out the Defender for Endpoint agents to all of our user devices that we're going to try and track what applications they're using. After all, these are the managed devices. They're going to give us the feedback on what's in use, the discovery of those apps. So to connect that up is really as simple as coming into the Endpoint Security console, going into Settings and into Advanced Features. And we'll find a little slider on here to switch on the Microsoft Cloud App Security integration. And there's literally nothing else that we need to do beyond that in order to start feeding visibility of which cloud apps are being used by our employees from their devices. Now, there's obviously going to be scenarios here where that agent isn't the only source of information as to what they're accessing, and we may have other products, other third-party products that can feed us that same information as well. So to integrate those, that's done through the Cloud App Security portal and the settings in here. So by accessing and logging into Cloud App Security and selecting Settings, we have sources of information that's going to help us build this discovery view. From these log collectors, by adding in services, and you'll notice here that Windows Defender for Endpoint has been added on here, and that's because we selected that slider to switch it on. And in this instance, because we're also using the Cloud App Proxy, that's feeding us back information or telemetry signals, if you like, as to what's being passed through that Cloud App Security proxy. And we'll touch a little bit more on where that proxy fits in this process as we go through it. Now, to add one of our systems, so that might be a UTM appliance from the likes of Meraki or Sophos, Fortinet. We've got a whole wide range of them covered. It's simply a case of adding the data source, selecting the vendor and the model or the range of products, if appropriate. There's a quite extensive list here that you can choose from. And when we select that, it will allow us to choose the type of or method in which we're going to ingest that log information. Now, most of these systems will have a function to syslog out all the event information that's going through them. So it's then a case of being able to receive that into our service. So by specifying here how the device is going to communicate with us, and let's go with the lowest common denominator for syslog, a UDP connection, and we'll give it a name just so that we've got a data source, and we'll add that on. Now that's prepared Cloud App Security to be able to receive the log, but we now actually have to have a method of receiving that information, and that comes through these log collectors. And to create a log collector, we're simply saying that it has a name. It might be our on-site syslog service. We have to specify the IP address that it's coming at us from. So this typically a public connection because we're coming to the Cloud App Service from the syslog service. And then we connect that back to those systems that are going to be sending that information to us through that log collector. So it acts as a bridging agent either on site or it might be on the end of a VPN in Azure. Once we've created that, we've then got a reference for the system, and we can then start sending that log information into the service. Now, once that's created, we've then got connection details for how to control that, and Microsoft have produced us a deployment guide for creating a VM or an image that will contain that collector service. So it's all pretty straightforward in terms of capturing logs and capturing events and being able to perform discovery in the Cloud App Service. So what happens once that starts? Well, the first stage is we get to see visibility of which systems and services our users are connecting to. So it's basically a big catalogue of all the discovered services that are going on out there across the environment, and we get a categorization of them so we can drill down and basically make decisions as to whether or not they should be allowed for use or not. And I referred to that in the early slides around them being sanctioned or unsanctioned. So are we going to allow them from a business perspective? Now, we want some information from these to determine things like that security posture, like do we trust them? Should they be in use? So we've got one here where Dropbox has been seen to be in use. We can click into it and it will give us some information about who's been using it, the volume of use that's been going through it, and also give us a bit of a timeline as to what's going on there. So we've got very few users on this particular service. I can check the IPs and see the logs in detail. But I can also, more importantly, from this info, gain an insight into what the security posture is of that service or application. So Microsoft are providing this for you in the background. They are performing these assessments, going out and establishing whether or not they have a process in there for GDPR reporting, whether they adhere to or have any kind of accreditation in place to show that they adhere to GDPR protection requirements, which of these compliance certifications that they've obtained. So it gives you a way to provide feedback to your compliance teams, or you can give access to this to your compliance teams so they can help you make decisions. Now, that might be quite an arduous task to have to keep coming back into this portal and looking for the discovered apps. So this is where we then start to use policies in the system to trigger somebody to come in here and look because something has occurred. So one of the simplest things you can do through your control policies in here is to create a discovery policy and set yourself a new app policy and tag it for review. It gives you a very simple way to say if it meets a certain criteria. So in this example here, if the overall risk score is quite low, so between 6 and 10, the higher the score, the greater their level of security that it's been shown to have in place, then we'll flag it as a low priority event, and we'll send an alert notification potentially out to users, and we'll tag it with a particular custom tag. We'll call it pending review in this particular scenario. So we don't get bombarded by these. In this case, we're going to create a daily counter of they must have tried to pass more than 50 megabytes of data to that service before we'll even entertain the fact that they're going to be flagged for review. Anything smaller than that just stays probably as unsanctioned in this scenario. But they're all decisions that you'd have to make about designing the use of the service. So potentially that's sending an email alert, which will have a link on it that will bring your security engineers or your IT team or potentially your compliance team into this portal to be able to then make a decision. When they come into the portal, they will simply see a view of that particular service because it's been flagged as requiring review. I'm just going to mimic that here by doing a quick lookup of all the pending review services that we found. So ServiceNow has come up on here. So that individual might need to make a decision that says, okay, I'm looking at ServiceNow, it's been flagged for me to review. I'll come to the info tab, and on here I can see that they've got a very high security standard applied to them. I can't see any warnings or failures, so it would be an immediate check with the organization that should our employees be using ServiceNow, and if that is the case, then they can very quickly just flag that as a sanctioned application and then clear the pending review flag, and that now becomes a sanctioned app that is available for use across the business. And you'd put your own processes around that check just to see if the apps are going to be allowed. So the whole point of this is to build up a picture of services that are absolutely sanctioned or those that have been unsanctioned for any particular reason. So things that pull up a very low score would probably, you could have a rule to automatically flag them as unsanctioned. And then how we use that information then falls into additional policies and potentially conditional access rules. Now, one of the simplest things you can do with this level of information, of sanctioned and unsanctioned, is to feed that information straight back to your Defender for Endpoint agents. So again, very simple to do. From our settings menu on here, we can go into settings, look at the Microsoft Defender for Endpoint, and with a simple switch of on or off, we can feed back all that unsanctioned information to the Defender for Endpoint agents and essentially just block the users from accessing it because we flagged the service itself as being unsuitable for use within the organization. But we can do an awful lot more with these policies and controls. So let's look at that policy section again and just walk through a couple of other scenarios about how we might use this. So some of you who've come in here and configured the default templates will have found that the vast majority of policies that are curated for us are around activity policies. So these are things like risky sign-ins, users trying to sign in from more than one location at the same time, the kind of observation of potential ransomware or kind of exfiltration of data. Then those are curated for you. You can come in here and just using the create policy option, you can create those monitoring activities. A quicker way to do that is often to come into the template section first, and then by selecting each one of these, you can simply add to create that definition and then tweak it as you go along. So if we wanted to do a policy across the business to look for files that are being shared with an unauthorized domain, we could just come in here and hit plus. I'm just going to walk you through that example from a point of view of how the policy works and just do it from scratch. So if we're in policies and we create a new policy, a file policy is particularly useful when we want to ensure that possibly only certain file types are available externally, or that when guest users connect, they are only able to download files that are classified as a certain at a certain level. So wherever possible, we want to try and use the templates from the policy options, because it pre-fills a lot of the information for us. So I'm going to go down here. I'm going to use that shared with an unauthorized domain just as an example, just to show you how that works. And what that's doing is putting together some filters here for what to look for. It's also filling in some descriptive fields, but you can change all of those. Now, the domains list here is based on any sharing event that's occurred within your tenants that's been observed through that discovered app service. So if your organization has shared something already with a domain, then they'll be on this list here. So if you wanted to exclude some or select multiples of them, you can add those into this particular list to say that if they are one of these, then we're going to apply an action to it. Or we can do it the other way around and say if they're not one of these named domains, then we're not going to apply this logic to them. So as we start to build up this rule, we can then start to get more precise with what or where we're going to apply these to. So we might apply the control to a specific location. We could apply it to a specific group of users in this case. And we might set an alert or a notification. So when we do that, we're going to advise either the auditors or the IT team on that this event has occurred. And then what action are we going to take when this occurs? So we might quarantine the file or prevent it from being shared to an external party. So that's how we build up the basic controls around a file itself. Now I just want to take another example of a file share just so that you can see what other options are possible around this. We can use the DLP classifications in here. So we have a set of built-in DLP functions that Microsoft provide us. So we might be looking for credit card numbers if it was a PCI DSS situation that we were trying to prevent, or we might be looking for employee information or passport numbers, credit card numbers, where we're trying to enforce some sort of GDPR control. And again, the actions that we want to take against it are applied at the bottom here. Now, we have different categorizations that we put to those, and that's about how we report that back to the organization. Another type of policy that I want to show you here is around a session policy. So if I'm going to create a session-based policy, that's going to watch everything that happens, everything that occurs when that user accesses the or is passed through the Cloud App Security service. So in this particular scenario, I want to apply an activity or a monitor that's going to perform a file level control as the users access some content. And I'll show you in a second about how we get them to this service, and I'll give you an example of what happens when this occurs. So again, I need to build up a filter of rules around when this is going to apply. So if I say that I only want to do this when my devices are not equal, so are not either compliant, so enrolled through Intune, my own devices, or in the hybrid, so they're just a domain PC. So I don't want to apply these rules if they're my devices that I know and trust. Where you've got scenarios where they're not on the domain and they're not under management, but you still want to exclude them, you can set up certificate enrollment as well, and then provide the certificate to the Cloud App broker so that it knows to ignore the machines because they're enrolled with that particular certificate. I also want to say that I'm going to apply this at the moment across the board to Office 365 services. And I'll show you in a second about how we enroll more services into the system. So this is not just about Office 365 and Microsoft systems. It's any service that you want to target through Cloud App Security. So I'm just going to select everything in Office 365. And what I'm going to do here is I'm going to say that, because I'm looking at files, so it's a session policy when they try and download a file. So I want to know that any of my files that have been classified for viewing or use within the organization, so they're confidential files effectively, I want to know that when an employee is not on one of my machines, that they are blocked from being able to download those classified files. So I don't want to stop them doing their job. I don't want to stop them using the system. If they're Word documents and spreadsheets and things that are in SharePoint or OneDrive, I'm more than happy for them to continue to edit them in the browser on the screen. But because it's not a device that I manage, then I don't want them downloading that content because it's been flagged as confidential or highly confidential potentially. So I'd look at my labeling and I'd say, right, all of these, apart from maybe that one because it's not protected, could go out to anybody, so maybe those two are allowed. But I'd make my choices as to which labeling types I don't want to leave, and then I'd change that to not equal. So I'm now able to watch all the content in my environment that's classified as confidential or highly confidential, is in Office 365 and is being accessed by a device that's not under my management. Now I want to take an action against that, and I'm just going to block that from happening. And maybe I want to send an email to the user as well to advise them why they were blocked, or possibly just display a custom message on the screen at the point they click on it so they understand why this block has been imposed. So that's a very simple way to exclude classified files from the service. You might have even more straightforward approaches to doing this, where you're just going to say that they're only allowed, I don't know, files that are in a PDF format, for example. So if it's not a PDF, then they may not download it by performing that block action. Then we should always alert or notify somebody that this is happening. So the action will take place every time because they're trying to do it and trying to get past the rules. But we want to make sure that somebody knows about this. So we might need to send an email alert to our auditors or to the compliance team to let them know it's going on. Again, they probably don't want to be bombarded by this. So what's the threshold of this happening before they get told? You know, otherwise, yeah, the user tried once, saw the message, didn't try again. If the user continues to try, then we should notify somebody that this is happening. And we don't have to do that by email. The text message service can be used there as well if it's deemed to be a high enough priority. Or you can link this out into Power Apps and into Power Automate to create a flow to be able to trigger some other sort of event in an alternate service or another system. So that's the basics of building up these DLP policies, and you continue to apply these and you layer them up in the service so that you've got a comprehensive control around all the possible systems that your users might be accessing or should be accessing. And by having that first check of sanctioned or unsanctioned and blocking their access to unsanctioned apps, and if you're using the Defender for Endpoint service, you're also automatically blocking their access to apps that are a threat or have some sort of malware threat to them. But by building up that posture, you're enhancing your control over access to your data, where the data is going, and the user's access to other services, because they're online, they can access the web. But by doing it through a controlled and understood process where you've got this ability to come back in and review all the apps that your users are connecting to. Now, I mentioned there about connecting other services. So we've got a whole list of apps and services that we've discovered here. We might want to be able to apply some of those controls to these services that are not part of Microsoft and 365. So how do we go about connecting that? Again, fairly straightforward. From the settings options in here, we have app connectors. So to connect an app to the service, we've got a handful of kind of curated app connectors that Microsoft have given us in here, where everything is pre-configured for us. It's just a case of checking the box and providing a logon, and then they federate together with the Cloud App Security Service. What we can also do for those, specifically for those conditional access controls, where we want to do blocking of file type downloads or monitoring of the classifications of data that's being issued out to them, are these conditional access app controls. Now, if I go to add one of these, you can see in here the list of these are way more extensive and actually can be anything that you can federate with Azure Active Directory. So the way we're going about applying these controls is we're checking at the point the user logs on whether or not the service that they're accessing is part of our Cloud App Security system. So if in here we've connected up Salesforce as an example, which we'll find there, once we connected Salesforce to the service, they log in with a federated logon to Azure AD. That gives us that connection point to check who they are. And at that point, we capture the connection to Salesforce, just as I'm going to show you here. We're just using SharePoint as an example. And we note that they are being asked to go through the conditional access service and apply any of those policies that we'd set. So because we're going to monitor them, we should advise them that that's happening. So we can place this message into the service. You don't have to, these are optional, and the users can flag that to hide it. Whatever your logon and authentication requirements are for our zero trust model still occur. So MFA or whatever the requirements are, certain browser, that type of thing, that all still happens. The user continues on, connects into the service, and you'll notice here that what's happening is we've appended to the end of the URL mcas.ms, and that's the connection, the Cloud App Security Broker's connection, where we're intercepting the traffic. It's the reverse proxy, if you like, that's sitting in front of the service. So whatever system we federate, whether it's Salesforce or some of the Meraki systems, Box, Dropbox, there's a whole host of them out there. If they federate with Azure AD, we can capture them, push them through the MCAS service, and then apply our policy controls and have complete visibility of what they're doing within that service, because we're proxying their connection. And to give an example of what happens when the user tries to download something, if I come into a site here, and I'll pick on our marketing team because it's easy to do so, and I'm just going to try and download a particular file from one of their document libraries. As I get to access that content, let's just find a file that I can go into on here. There we go. Say I want to try and download that particular Word document. At the point I go to request a download, the system tells me it's blocked, and to make sure that any browser that's trying to circumvent that process doesn't find a way around it, what it actually does is issue the system with this text file instead that just repeats the message that says that particular file is blocked. So no content ever leaves the service that's going through the Cloud App Security Broker down to the user because they met that policy. And that's as simple as the user experience is. It's obviously a case of deciding what you're going to bring to the Cloud App Security Broker, what method of connection they're using. In this example here, I showed the browser. In order to decide when you're going to pass them to the Cloud App Service, you do that through your conditional access policies. So you get to those either through Endpoint Manager or through Azure Active Directory. And in your conditional access policy, it's simply a case of creating a rule. I've got a demo one here that we've just used. This is what just triggered that service. And in here, I've said that when we target a specific application, so the user is trying to sign into Office 365, and again, I'm sort of repeating some of the query that I put in the policy, but I can do it at different layers. I'm saying on here that they are using anything except Android and iOS. So I'm possibly going to have a different policy for phones and tablets. But when they're coming at me to connect with either the browser or an application that authenticates, then I want to apply these particular controls. I'm not putting any additional access control. You might have multi-factor authentication in there, or you might have a separate rule for multi-factor, and that's all about layering rules in conditional access, which again you can find from some of our previous TechTalk sessions. But in this one, I'm using the session-based control to pass the service over to conditional access. Now, if I had a whole host of conditional access policies, I might be using a custom policy here, and that will then filter onto all the rules in Cloud App Security. Or if I'm just doing a generic block all downloads, I have a very simple way to do that here by just specifying block downloads. So that's how we perform the interception. It's at the point the user logs on. That's dictated by the conditional access rule, so what to do when they log on. The connection through the conditional access app controls here into the Cloud App Security Service. That's the system knowing that what it needs to do, or knowing which services it needs to use this control function against. And then in our policies and under our session policies in here, this is where we define what we want it to do when that user connects through that service. So conditional access passes us to the Cloud App Service. Cloud App knows that it should perform an action with the app because the app has been connected to it, and then the policy defines what we actually want to happen, and we can put some additional filters in at that particular level. Quite a common one is to apply filters where you're only targeting specific site URLs within SharePoint. You might have a portal that external users are allowed to access on a certain site URL that has guest users in it. You don't want the block downloads to apply to those, but you do want the block downloads to apply to, for example, a senior management team site. So you might use the filters here to filter out a particular site URL so that the control is applied to that. And then the user experience, as we saw here, is it all looks and functions in the same way. They may or may not get a prompt when they first connect to tell them that they're being monitored. And the only difference is the URL has mcas.ms applied to the end of it. And then when they go to try and perform the action that we've prevented, they get a message on the screen to tell them that that's not allowed. So that's some very kind of brief glimpses into what's possible around Cloud App Security. Hopefully gives you some ideas on how you might use the Cloud App Security service. What we'll do now is just switch back over onto our slides, and we'll just have a quick look through some of the questions that we've got in the Q&A and see if anybody wants me to answer something. Okay, so Rich is asking, is there a change in Microsoft 365 licensing required for this feature, or is it included in existing license levels? Okay, so the starting point to say there is all of the conditional access controls the ability to apply some kind of enforcement like blocking downloads or filtering out the file types. Any of those policies that perform a file type control or a session control, they all require at least a complete Cloud App Security license. That's in the Microsoft 365 E5 product or the EM&S E5 product. But you could add the Cloud App Security license to an existing subscription. You don't have to license the entire bundle. The idea of it being part of the EM&S E5 product suite is that you typically want to leverage a lot of the other functions around it, like Defender for Endpoint, the Azure Active Directory Premium, and probably Endpoint Manager to get the settings and things out to the devices. Another question, is there a limit to the number or amount of log input from outside sources? So the number of devices and systems you connect, no, there's no limit to that. This isn't a SIEM system, so that's probably a starting point to say that it's got some SIEM type functions to it, but it's more of a kind of real time or kind of near time duration that we're holding information. So you can throw all the logs and things at it that you want, but there's a cap on the duration to which we hold that log information. It's not a cap on the number of sources that you can feed it. Likewise, the volume of traffic that you put through the Cloud App Security Broker for all the services that you connect, number of users connected, all that kind of thing, that's all pretty much unlimited. I do often get asked around guests and how that works with guests. It's exactly the same as it would a user. As long as you target them with the conditional access rule, then the MCAS service will apply, and you've got that same ratio of guests to users as you get with your license for Azure Active Directory. So there's no additional caps in place around the Cloud App Security service. Okay, I think that pretty much covers any questions that we got in the Q&A. For once, I'm almost kind of finishing on time. We promised everybody 45 minutes and we're almost there. Phoebe has very kindly placed into the Q&A for us a little survey. If you wouldn't mind answering that for us, just give us some feedback and give me some feedback on potentially what we might run as the next session. You can see on screen that my contact details are there. Please reach out if you want to go through any specific scenarios for yourselves, if you want to understand if something's possible or not. As a cloud service provider, we can add and remove these licenses to your subscriptions on a very short-term basis if you just want to try something or see if the scenario works. So yeah, please get in touch if you've got any other questions. Feel free to reach out to me directly, and I look forward to seeing you all again on our next session in March. Thanks very much for your time.